So what I'm going to suggest is that we really can't understand or appreciate Teilhard de Chardin's understanding of the noosphere unless we place it within the context of his cosmic vision. And since I've recently written two books, one on Teilhard, one on Einstein, the thought has occurred to me recently that it would be nice if we could listen in to a conversation between these two scientific giants, whom I'll introduce to you in a moment. This is a conversation that never actually took place, but it could have taken place because both Teilhard and Einstein were exiles from Europe in the 50s. And Teilhard was working at the American Museum of Natural History, while Einstein was at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, New Jersey. And so they were only miles apart. And interestingly, they died only days apart in the spring of 1955. So I'm going to propose that I be a kind of moderator in this hypothetical conversation. And first I'll introduce Einstein and then Teilhard, and then see what they might have thought in terms of a conversation, with a serious conversation of one with the other. Einstein, of course, is known as the greatest scientist of our age. And this was primarily because his theory of general relativity transformed our whole understanding of the universe in a way that actually, as we'll see, made Teilhard's own life and fame possible. He thought of time, perhaps for the first time in human consciousness, as inseparable from matter. Time and nature are so tied up with each other that if time suddenly came to a halt, nature would disappear as well. And this is different from the way in which many philosophers and certainly theologians had thought of time before this. Time and space were considered like containers into which God, if you were a theist, poured the content of creation. They were sort of pre-existing molds or forms into which creation was poured. So what Einstein did was quite revolutionary, and Teilhard was one of the first to pick it up, and that's to show that time is inseparable from nature. And that means, therefore, that the cosmos, if you allow that time is irreversible, which Einstein did not do at first, if you allow that time is irreversible, if it's tied essentially to nature, that means that the whole cosmos can now, maybe for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, be understood as a story, as a drama, perhaps. Einstein, however, did not see that. He did not see the universe as a story. And it was because I think he loved eternity more than time. And ironically, this bound him more closely to some of Teilhard's religious ancestors than it did to the cosmology that developed after Einstein. He thought that religion, if you ask him what his religious life was, what his spirituality was, he would say it's getting close to timelessness. It's timelessness alone, he thought, that can deliver us from the cruelties of perishing and death that occur in the temporal world. For him, access to this world of timelessness was not by meditation or prayer or hope, but by way of geometry. And this gave geometry a kind of sacred significance in his understanding of things. He had no need, therefore, for religious consolation of a personal God, the God of Abraham, the prophets, and Jesus. That was not part of his way of thinking. In fact, it was contrary to his way of thinking, especially about the nature of science. So he was content with an impersonal universe as long as it was reliably attached to this domain of timeless geometric forms, which underlay his whole cosmology. Meanwhile, Teilhard, as most of you know, is a Jesuit priest, also by profession a geologist, a paleontologist, and hence an evolutionist. And when he was still a young priest, he started writing essays on how you could connect his Christian faith with his evolutionary understanding of life and of the universe. Well, his religious superiors got wind of these experiments in thought, and they were afraid that they were just a bit too adventurous for the time. So they literally persuaded, maybe even exiled Teilhard to China, which is the wrong place to send people who like to dig up old rocks and bones. Because while he was there in China for a quarter of a century, he developed a sterling scientific reputation as one of the top 2 or 3 geologists of the Asian continent. In his spare time while he was in China, he started writing his main work. We now call it The Human Phenomenon. Then it was called, his first English translation was The Phenomenon of Man. And it was in this book that he introduced the notion of a noosphere within the context of his attention in that book to show that mind or thought is completely part of the cosmos. At any stage of thought, it's just as much a cosmic reality as it is a human or terrestrial reality. He died relatively unknown in New York, where he was working at the American Museum of Natural History in 1955, very much alone and unknown. He's buried now in Poughkeepsie, New York. What I want to accentuate about his thought was that he was one of the first scientists in the 20th century to have seen the spiritual and cultural and intellectual significance of Einstein's universe, even in a way that Einstein himself did not see, at least at first. For Teilhard, the universe became increasingly, in his mind, a drama, a story, a great drama of awakening. Awakening to what? We'll see in a moment. But for him, God is the elusive personal horizon to which the whole cosmos is awakening by way of what's happening to mind and thought in our terrestrial precincts and perhaps elsewhere in the universe. So for him, the noosphere is primarily a new epoch in cosmogenesis, that is, in the becoming of the universe. The universe is unfinished, but the cosmogenesis consists of a kind of increased gradual intensification of awakening to God, ultimately in his thinking. So if I had the two together in conversation and I were moderating the conversation, I would ask each of them to give me a sense of what gets them up in the morning, what gives meaning to their lives. Einstein would have no difficulty in answering that question. What gives meaning to his life is the rapturous amazement, these are his words, at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. So his faith was a cultivation of the mystery, of the comprehensibility, the intelligibility of the universe. A great mystery because we don't know why the universe is intelligible, but thankfully it is. It is beyond question, the sense of mystery and this rapture at the harmony of natural laws, closely akin to that which has possessed the religious geniuses of all ages. So he felt that his cult of timelessness allied him very much with all those religious people throughout the ages who have made attachment to timelessness and detachment from time the goal of their religious lives. If I asked Teilhard the same question, he would say the only thing that keeps me youthful and active, he would often say what gives zest to my life is the growing belief that there is something immense, something beautiful about to take place, something that's coming in the future, in other words, throughout the world, throughout the universe is what he meant. And that we must abandon ourselves. This is the good life for him. The good life consists of abandoning ourselves to the mighty current of this development in which the universe is awakening to something more up ahead. So to summarize, the spiritual life of each of these men understood it. For Einstein, spirituality is the sense of being carried out of time into the timeless mystery of the universe's geometric comprehensibility. I can picture Einstein going into his study every day, sealing the door behind him, and figuratively speaking, bathing himself in the eternity, the timelessness of the numbers and patterns of mathematics and geometry that put him in touch with something solid, something consistent, something that could respond to his anxiety. For Teilhard, the spiritual life consists of the sense of being carried forward by time into the immensity and beauty of what is not yet, of something more up ahead, the sense of belonging to a universe that is still coming into being. And since for Teilhard, being and consciousness are correlative notions, the way in which the universe becomes more is by becoming more conscious. Well, if the conversation were to continue, I think Einstein would immediately say to Teilhard, I don't see the cosmos going anywhere at all. There can be no real increase or more being emerging in the universe than the universe already has accessible to it. By way of geometry, we can see that the beauty of the geometric forms and patterns that have always underlay the universe, that's reality enough. So let's get in touch with that to get in touch with the real world. And as many of you know, even today, there are theoretical physicists who have the same kind of metaphysics, a metaphysics in which the really real is the timeless, something that Teilhard vehemently rejected. If I asked Einstein, does this mean you believe in God? He would say, I believe in Spinoza's God. Spinoza, as you know, was an early modern philosopher who taught that nature and God are two words, two names for all that is. So there's nothing that transcends nature because nature is already complete and full and finished. And I think this affected Einstein's understanding of faith and eternity as well. Since nature in traditional theology had the attributes of eternity and necessity, that means Spinoza thought that nature has the attributes of eternity and necessity, which means that nature is already complete. The universe is finished. God, or if you want to call it nature, is complete. The future, in the sense of the temporal future of what is to come, has already been closed off from eternity. And that makes the laws that run nature indestructible and eternal also. And this is the basis for Einstein's objection to the whole notion of a personal God. If nature is a closed continuum of causes and effects, then the laws of science that determine this cause and effect relationship apply absolutely and cannot be violated. So the existence of a personal God, a responsive God, a God to whom one could pray, would interrupt the laws of nature. For such a God to be known as such, God would have to violate the regularities of nature. And this cannot happen if we really respect and love science the way Einstein did. A responsive God, a prayer answering God, an intervening God would signal the end of science. So there is no reason in his spirituality to pray. I believe he would accept the sarcastic definition of prayer that Ambrose Bierce gives in his Devil's Dictionary, that prayer is asking that the laws of the universe be annulled in behalf of a single petitioner, confessedly unworthy. And so prayer would seem to Einstein also to be something quite absurd, quite contrary to the nature of reality. Now, interestingly, Teilhard's own early religious training was essentially a cult of timelessness. He was following the Catholic spirituality that had gone back centuries, that had been influenced by Neoplatonism through Augustine and others, and then by Greek philosophy and Aquinas, this venerable tradition of his own Catholic theological understanding was itself, it seemed, for the young Teilhard, a cult of timelessness. And I think he was starting to bite at this bit with some aggression, even rather early in his thinking, certainly by the time he was a young priest. This scheme that he was raised in, and that I, as a Roman Catholic, was also taught in, this is what I cut my religious spiritual teeth on, starting in the 40s and 50s. This scheme was a static, vertical, hierarchical level of layers, which operate according to what you might call the hierarchical principle. And that principle maintains that understanding a lower level in the hierarchy is not enough to qualify you to understand a higher level. Following the tradition, not just in Christianity, but many other religious traditions, there was a sense on the part of the great mystics that you need to undergo a personal transformation in order to become adequate to understanding or to come in contact with the higher levels in the hierarchy. So this was Teilhard's spirituality. The more important something is, the more immaterial, the more elusive it is. You see the influence of Plato on Catholic spirituality, so much so that Nietzsche once commented that Christianity is Platonism for the people. And there's a certain truth in that, which Teilhard would eventually agree with. So if there is an ultimate meaning, an ultimate reality, it would lie beyond human comprehension due to the hierarchical principle that a lower level cannot comprehend or grasp a higher level. However, in Teilhard's Christian tradition, even though you can't grasp a higher level, you can have a sense of being grasped by it. And in Christian theology, from Aquinas to Paul Tillich, that was the understanding of faith. Faith is an awareness of being grasped by and allowing yourself to be carried away by something higher in being, something more elusive, but something more real. And since we can't directly refer to this, we have to talk about it symbolically or analogically or metaphorically, something for which we never were taught to apologize, because the fact that we have to use fuzzy language in faith and theology is a mark of the eminence or excellence of that to which we are trying to refer. So this scheme still gives meaning to the lives of millions. And I think if Teilhard were here, he would say even billions of people in our terrestrial precincts. The meaning of life is to allow yourself to be carried step by step into a climactic communion with timelessness. And that would mean detaching yourself from the various layers, especially the lower levels, the material levels of the hierarchy. So it's important to understand that this was the framework of Teilhard's early spirituality. And in a way, it's closer to Einstein's cozying up to timelessness than it is to the implications that other scientists were drawing out of Einstein's relativity equations. After Einstein, Teilhard, as I said, was one of the first scientists to realize that Einstein had changed, if you look deeply into his science, had changed the whole understanding of the universe as something that's still coming into being. So for Teilhard, the most important religious and theological question was not how can I get close to timelessness, but what's going on in this drama that we call the universe. And for Teilhard, we'll see what's going on is it's a drama of gradual awakening. And we have to situate the noosphere as, at least from an earthly point of view, the latest stage in this cosmic awakening to what? To infinite meaning, to infinite beauty, to infinite goodness, to infinite truth. Names which in Teilhard's scholastic training were used to refer to God. So traditional spirituality explains why Christians and other religious people, for the most part, even to this day, have very little interest in the question that Teilhard was interested in, what's going on in the universe. Traditional spirituality and religious education points most Christians and many other traditions to something beyond time, to an eternity which means timelessness, up above. And that in order to reach that, we have to detach ourselves from the earth. And it's not even interesting to people who have this spirituality, what's going on in the universe. Whereas that became the main question for Teilhard, and that's where he wants us to locate his understanding of the noosphere. Science, starting with geology, then with Darwinian biology, which Teilhard embraced, and then with Einstein's cosmology, as interpreted by Lemaitre and others who had also witnessed the findings and discoveries of Fred Hubble and his staff at the Mount Wilson Observatory, the redshift of the galactic light, giving smoking gun evidence that the universe is still expanding and that the universe is still coming into being. Science has opened a new horizon, the horizon of this worldly future to human consciousness. And instead of fleeing from that awareness, as many of his religious colleagues, theologians, and his family and friends did, Teilhard made the future of the universe the horizon of his, not just scientific thought, but of his religious thought. And he did this on the basis of the fact that deep down in his own Christian tradition, the prophetic tradition, the thinking of Jesus and St. Paul and others, the sense that God inhabits the future more than the sphere of timelessness began to affect Teilhard much more deeply after he realized that the universe itself is moving toward this new future. And so he wants to locate the noosphere as a new chapter, as a new epoch, you might say, not just in terrestrial history, but in the cosmos. Teilhard talks a lot about the earth, but the earth is something he wants to talk about because it's a portal into the cosmos. He's basically a cosmic thinker, not an earthly thinker. So he can easily be mistaken for being too terrestrial, but his ultimate objective was to talk about the universe and to talk about his faith in the context of this understanding of the universe. If we understand the universe apart from God, then our understanding will collapse into pure naturalism. And the problem with naturalism is that it doesn't love nature enough. For Teilhard, if you really love nature, you want it to be not only beautiful, but everlasting. And so he wants to give us a universe which is consistent with the basic religious impulse to embrace something indestructible. But he wanted that indestructibility not to be located up above in some sphere of timelessness, but up ahead in the fulfillment of time. So stay with time is his message, because time itself might have a fulfillment. But if it's to have an indestructible goal, it has to have a kind of quality in which this goal lies up ahead rather than up above. So think of God not so much as up above, but up ahead. And you'll be more in touch with the Abrahamic tradition than with the Platonic strain of thought that influenced Christianity and other traditions over the last 2,000 more years. So if Teilhard were here today, he would fully embrace the post-Einsteinian cosmology, which consists of the 13.8 billion year cosmic story that science is now telling us. Except that Teilhard would want to emphasize the story is not over. If you collapse or express the temporal scale of the universe in 30 big books, each book being 450 pages, each page representing 1 million years in the story, you can get some sense of the magnitude of the immensity of time and space. The Big Bang would take place on page 1 of volume 1. And the first two shelves and part of the third would consist of essentially lifeless and mindless material processes and mindless stuff. Life begins after the Earth spins out around the sun 4.5 billion years ago. A billion or so years later, life begins in a very unenthusiastic way, and it doesn't become really complex until you get to the end of volume 29. Dinosaurs come in after the middle of volume 30. They go extinct on page 384, and mammalian life, and eventually, starting several pages for the end of volume 30, the phenomenon of what Teilhard calls thought. That's the technical term he gives to the emergence of consciousness in this story. Thought emerges. First there's matter, then there's the epoch of life, and then moving fastly toward the present, the epoch of thought. And in this epoch of thought, he wants to include not just the thought of individual minds and brains, but of the whole Earth. The phenomenon of thought is now a planetary phenomenon, influenced by technology, by education, by human psyche, human social tendencies, capacity to relate. It's the sphere of mind that has superimposed itself upon the biosphere, the noosphere, he calls it. So the noosphere has been in the works since the beginning. The universe has always been a kind of awakening since its very first moments. In this scheme, thought, since it just came about the last few pages of the last volume, can seem to be, to the scientific naturalist and scientific materialist, kind of like a cosmic afterthought. Whereas for Teilhard, it's been in the works from the very beginning. And so that's why the noosphere is so important. It makes explicit, more than any other phenomenon in the cosmic history, that the universe is a drama of awakening. When we look at the 30 volumes here, all the gray ones where life does not exist might suggest, and it has suggested to most scientists, that the universe is essentially mindless and lifeless. But Teilhard's point in writing the phenomenon in all of his other literature was to point out that this means nothing if you understand the universe as an awakening. Thought has been brewing in this process from the very beginning. And these 30 volumes might turn out to be only the dawn of this awakening that he calls the universe. And so his understanding of science and religion is that we can make better sense of them if we see them as different ways or different levels of explanation, trying to read in depth this cosmic story. But since the story is still going on, we can't stop reading, and we can't decide immediately here and now that the story is over, or that we know by dint of science or any other discipline what the universe is all about. We have to adopt the posture of expectation, bridled expectation, of looking forward, of accepting the unfinished character of the universe and accepting the limitations of our understanding of the story of awakening, of which we are a part, like a fish in water, and cannot get outside of it to see what's actually really going on. So he's especially disturbed at what happened to his classic hierarchical spirituality. This cosmic story has seemed in the mind of most people who look at it to signal the collapse of the classic hierarchy, which was the framework for spirituality and piety in the past. Matter, which was the lowest level in the traditional pre-scientific hierarchy, is now the dominant feature of this new cosmography. Life comes in only as a fluke in volume 22. And mind, in the sense of human consciousness, doesn't come in until the very last page, maybe the last fifth, the last 10th or so of the very last page of the very last volume. This is when not only thought, but ethical aspiration and our faith traditions, including Teilhard's tradition, come into the cosmos. So it might seem, therefore, that meaning is something that we humans have projected back onto those lifeless volumes of the cosmos. But for Teilhard, the emergence of a longing for meaning, including Einstein's own longing for meaning and longing for something indestructible, is an essential part of the cosmic story. And we can't understand the cosmic story if we divorce it from mind, or if we divorce it now from what mind is turning into, this new and still developing phenomenon that we call the noosphere.